because I take any opportunity that I can find to talk about those ancient Greeks. So Aristotle is going to teach us how to write persuasively. So you all read some editorials last week, and now you're going to be writing your own editorial, which I kind of warned you was coming. And to do that, we're going to attempt to use Aristotle's strategy for being convincing. And so the idea of the triangle, this is a weird graphic that doesn't actually have a triangle on it. The idea is that if you cover all three bases, you're more convincing. So the three bases, or the three corners of the triangle, are called by Aristotle logos, ethos, and pathos. Those are terms that are still used in persuasive sort of writing. That's so they are Greek words, but they are borrowed into English for these purposes. So logos, if you think of logic, that's kind of that's a fairly good equivalency in English, but it appeals to reason. And we would probably like to think that appealing to reason is all that you would need. But if you've been paying any attention to anything that has gone on in the world, ever, then you would know that appealing to reason is never enough to convince people. I'm going to skip to pathos. Pathos appeals to the emotions and sympathetic imagination as well as to beliefs and values. So it's usually we can just shorten that up to that's the emotional appeal. And the ethos is the character or the authority of the writer himself or herself. Now, we think of on the triangle, you can think of it as the audience, the writer, and the text itself. Right? This is another way to look at it. So the writer is I'm going to switch colors here. The writer is the ethos. The text itself is the logos. In fact, that is the word in Greek. And the audience is the pathos. Now, which of these is most important? The audience? I intentionally asked you that question in a specific way. Most important is up to you to decide. Most effective is not necessarily the same as most important. Most effective is the pathos, is the appeal to emotion. That is what is generally the most effective angle of the argument. But most important, not necessarily, depending on your priorities. If your priority is to be right, then the logos should be the most important. But no one's priority is to be right. Everyone's priority is to be convincing. Does that kind of make sense? So when you are writing, you don't need to be right. You need to be convincing. And this is what English is all about. That's what makes it so much harder and easier at the same time as other subjects. It's harder because there is no right, but it's also easier because there is no right. There's just convincing or unconvincing. So the ethos of the writer is something that is on the surface would appear to be difficult to establish. So if I write something, is it convincing because I have written it? Because me in particular has written it? I in particular have written it? It depends what I'm trying to write, and it depends whether you know me or not. Right? If you know me and think that I'm smart, then it is important that I in particular wrote that thing. Right? It is helpful in convincing you. If you know me and if you respect my opinion about anything in general or about this subject in particular. So what do? If you are writing for people that you don't know and don't know you, what do? How do you establish this ethos? Now you need to, but how can you do that? So I'm skipping right over the pathos and the logos because I think that the appeal to logic and the appeal to emotion are easy enough to understand, and you can follow up on those on your handout, which I've also given you in digital form. But this part is the tricky part, especially if you are not known, right? If you are a well-known writer, or you're writing for a well-known publication, you're writing for the New York Times, then you have some built-in ethos because you're writing for the New York Times, right? And so the people who are reading that are going to assume this guy somewhat, at least, knows what he's talking about, I expect. Now, you can't always have that, but there are things you can do. So I want you guys to think about it for a minute. How can you build yourself or establish yourself some ethos, some credibility as a writer? What sort of things can you do to make your editorial or your persuasive piece of writing more convincing? Steve?
Examples of your own life, experience, like something related
Yep.
to the topic like that.
Yep. So, your experience. This is where, and in editorials, you generally want to stay away from personal, like using the first person, right? You don't usually use I in an editorial. Even though it is an opinion piece, you want to state it as though it's factual, more or less. But in order to build up your credibility, personal experience. So I know something about this because I have done this for this many years, right? So you're telling the audience right out that they should trust you because you've got experience with this. Now the way around the I is to and I don't know if you have seen this, you did probably on some of the editorial examples that I gave you, either at the beginning or most often at the end of the article, there'll be like 1 or 2 sentences about the writer, right? That's where you put in your experience with this subject. What makes you qualified to talk about this subject? Okay, so that's one thing you can do. Now, is there any way for you to be qualified to talk about climate change and how it relates to wildfires in California? Is there any way for you to give experience? Not really, no. I mean, maybe some of you fought forest fires in the summertime as a summer job or something. It has happened. But for the most part, you can't have that experience, right? You're not a climate scientist. You're not a forest fire fighter. That was harder to say than I thought it was going to be. So if you don't have that experience, then what? Are you just not allowed to have an opinion about this?
You also here. You source from people that are experts.
Yep. Use experts. If you're not an expert, find the experts and quote them. Right? Alex?
You could claim to be an expert anyways.
Sorry?
You could claim to be an expert
You can claim to be an expert anyways? Yes, you could, but we want to stay away from outright lying in here. We need to be convincing without outright lying. I like the way you think, though. It's good. Now, there is at least one other thing you can do, and that is, I'm running out of room here. I should have put the ethos at the top of the board. Quality of your writing. This is where your mastery of the English language helps you be more convincing, assuming that English is the language that you are arguing in. And for our purposes in English class, I'm going to insist that you stick to English. But the quality of your writing can help you be convincing. I can sound smart about things because I know how to sound smart about things, even if I don't know anything about those things. Right? It is a crucial skill. It got me 3 university degrees, in fact, knowing how to sound smart about things that I don't, in fact, know anything about. But this is something I do know about. Okay, so does that make sense to you guys? It's one of my favorite little mini lessons is on the rhetorical triangle, because you get to think about the different ways to sort of be convincing. So the follow-up to this is I have some letters to the editor posted on the Google Classroom for you to read. They are not current, and in fact, they're not even real letters to the editor. They're like sample letters to the editor. So on an editorial page, there will often be 2 or 3 editorial pieces that are written by the newspaper staff, and then on the same page, or possibly a facing page, there will be letters written by members of the public to the editor. And so quite often, these letters are written in by experts saying, actually, I think you've got it wrong about your reporting on this case because I'm Professor so-and-so, and this is what I think, right? So leaning on the ethos, or they are quite often leaning on the pathos, that people are writing in about their emotional reactions to stories or editorials that have been in the newspaper. And sometimes they're writing in to try to argue the logic of something the newspaper has published. But these are all these letters to the editor are in response to something that the newspaper has already published, and that is usually the case with letters to the editor. So what you are going to do is read these letters, and for each one, you're going to explain why you think it is leaning on one of these three corners of the triangle. So tell me which one you think it leans most heavily on for each of the articles, and give me like a sentence or two explaining why you think that. So that is your preparation for the editorial. So that you should be able to have that done for sure by the end of class. The next thing is for your editorial, which should be posted on the classroom now. For your editorial, you don't need to stick with the same topic that you have been researching. You can if you want to, but you can branch out into anything that is sort of current, right? That is in the news now. And we've all sort of built some familiarity with the issues that are kind of ongoing in the news these days. What you are looking to do first is establish what it is that you want to say about your issue, right? What is your opinion? And so that's the thesis. So before you leave today, you should have submitted to me a thesis of this is what I want to say. So not a topic, but a stance on that topic. I'm trying not to give you specific examples here because I don't want to steal anybody's idea, or I don't want you to think, oh, I was going to do that, and then Grunerud used my idea as an example. So let me think of something. Okay, so something that's not current would be the death penalty. That's the kind of thing I used to have to write debates and persuasive essays about when I was in school. Nobody really talks about that anymore, unless Steve-O does in his Utopia. Was that you, Steve-O? You had
Oh yeah, that was last year.
in last year's class? I think you had the death penalty, didn't you? Anyways, the death penalty would be the topic. Your thesis statement would be the death penalty should be instituted in cases of whatever. You fill in the blank. Right? So that's your thesis. The death penalty should be instituted for all minor crimes. Or some specific stance, not just it's good or it's bad, but you have a specific stance, and that is what your editorial is going to build towards, convincing people that they should support your plan. Alex?
Do we have to actually support our stance?
Do you have to actively support your stance? No, you just have to pretend to.
Oh yeah.
So you don't have to believe what you're writing. And if you pay attention enough, you'll come across an awful lot of writers who probably don't believe the things that they're writing. So, for example, well, actually, I won't give you examples on that. That's almost too easy, and that would be me cherry picking sides. But you will notice that we talked about the left and right leaning media. You will notice that the right leaning media will praise a right-leaning politician for the same things that they criticized a left-leaning politician for in the previous administration. That's as vague as I could put that. But if you want to follow that line of thought through, you can put together probably what I'm saying. Questions about that? Okay, so editorials first. Then with one sentence or two sentences each about which corner of the triangle, and then we'll go on to, letters to the editor, I meant first. And then we'll go on to editorial theses, and I have a how to write an editorial handout, I guess, a digital handout that is attached to the assignment, and we'll look at a video explaining that as well. But I'll give you a few minutes to work on it. All right. I'm going to turn this off.